All right. Hi, everyone, and thanks for attending our first Financial Fridays of the spring semester. Today, we're going to talk about how to budget your refund and some strategies for how to manage them throughout the semester. So throughout this presentation, I encourage you to send any questions you have in the chat. Depending on what they are, we may address them as they come up, or we may save them until the end. So we'll first start with some introductions. So my name is Lindsay Burcham, and I manage the Financial Wellness at Penn program. I also want to share I am a recent Figley Penn alum. I graduated in 2019, so I was in your shoes not too long ago, where I was figuring out how to manage my own student account refund. So I'm happy to talk about my experience if you have questions about that. And I'm also joined by one of our program's peer educators. So Matt, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Matthew Sheeler. I'm a peer educator for financial wellness at Penn, and I'm currently a sophomore in the college studying economics and environmental studies. And I am a Figley student also receiving a refund, so I will share any personal experiences whenever they're applicable.
Great. Thanks, Matt. I also want to share, we have another staff member with us today from the financial aid office. So Eric Herrera is in the call. He is the Deputy Director of Student Financial Aid and will be here to answer general questions about refunds, financial aid, should they come up. If you have questions about your specific circumstances, you should make sure to contact the financial aid office instead of trying to address it here. This presentation is being recorded, so you likely don't want to share that information in this setting. So I want to start by telling you all a little bit about our program in case you're unfamiliar. So Financial Wellness at Penn is a program that intends to help students understand how to manage their personal finances, not only now while you're a student at Penn, but also in the future. And you can see our full mission statement is on the screen. I want to highlight that given that our mission is education-based, it's really important for us to provide a disclaimer that financial education can do a lot for individuals, but it can't solve all money struggles. So we're not going to pretend that it does. So financial education can't fix poverty or repair damage caused by years of economic injustice. Like I said, when I was a Penn student, I was a first-generation low-income student. I budgeted weekly, I stayed on top of my finances, but it didn't make me less poor. It didn't make me have more money by doing that. So I just want to highlight that what we can do with financial education is set the record straight on all things finance and help you understand what your options are and how to choose between them. Our goal is to provide you with the education to empower you to make financial decisions that are best for you when the time comes. So disclaimers out of the way, we like to start every presentation by outlining the goals that we hope to achieve throughout the course of our time together today. So first, we're going to talk to you about the financial aid process and what circumstances lead to you receiving a refund. That's going to give you some context for how you should be managing it. Then we'll identify a few potential strategies that you could use to budget your refund. And then we'll also talk about ways you can actually implement those budgets and some tools that you can use to help you. So let's start by explaining how your financial aid package may lead to you receiving a refund. And like I just said, this is crucial to understand because it adds context for how you should be spending those funds. I also want to give a heads up in case there are grad students in attendance. The first part of this presentation is going to be most relevant for undergrads in attendance because we're discussing the undergraduate aid program. That being said, you could still benefit from the concepts discussed, and you'll certainly benefit from the budgeting strategies that we discuss later. So first, I want to talk about cost of attendance. So your cost of attendance is the sum of all of your educational expenses. And as an example, we have 3 different possible costs of attendance for undergrads this academic year to accommodate the varying circumstances that students may be learning in this year. So this estimate of all your expenses is the basis of your financial aid package. And so the cost of attendance can be broken down into two main categories. We typically refer to them as direct and indirect expenses, but I think it's helpful to frame them as billed versus unbilled, just to understand how they all fit together in your financial aid package. So billed expenses have specific costs, like specific numerical costs, determined by the university and charged to your student account. Unbilled expenses, on the other hand, are estimates of what you might expect to spend in those categories. And thus that amount is accounted for in your financial aid package. And I want to highlight that those estimates are just that. They are estimates based on a variety of factors. And it may not always be representative of your specific spending and your needs that you have. So regardless, these are the amounts that are allotted to you. And I can share an example of how an estimate didn't necessarily work for me when I was a student. So I studied psychology when I was a student at Penn. And in general, after you finish the first few semesters of big lecture classes, you mostly take small seminars where you read journal articles instead of having to buy textbooks for the semester. So for my last 2 years at Penn, I really didn't have to buy textbooks unless I was taking some sort of class to fill a general requirement that required a textbook. So for the most part, if I had this cost of attendance for living on campus and I had an allotment of 1,358 for textbooks in the year, for the most part, I didn't use that because I didn't need to buy textbooks. So any money within my package to accommodate for that would have gone to other expenses. Maybe I put it toward more personal expenses or travel or something of that nature. So I just want to highlight that the estimated numbers may not be exactly what you're spending in those categories, and you don't have to strive to spend that amount in those categories. So once your cost of attendance is determined based on your living circumstances, your financial aid package is built. And this begins with determining your expected family contribution, which I may refer to as EFC, just to shorten it. And this EFC is based on what you submit in your financial aid application. So when you fill out the FAFSA, the CSS profile, the Penn Financial Aid Supplement, and you submit your W-2s and tax returns, work is done to identify what your expected family contribution is. Basically, how much can your family put toward your educational costs? A common misconception that I want to highlight is that making changes to your living expenses will change your EFC. But this number stays the same regardless of what's charged to your bill. So really it's your billed expenses that change. And I just want to briefly talk about an example because I've seen this come up a lot in talking to students. And I want to encourage you to learn how it actually works so it doesn't cause misunderstandings down the line. So what I've seen in the past is a student will say, you know, I have an EFC of around $10,000. And so the student looks at the cost of attendance and they think, wow, that's close to the amount that it costs to live on campus. So everything I'm paying to the university is for my on-campus housing. It's making a connection that's not really there. That's not necessarily how it works out. So this student thinks if I choose to live off campus, I just won't have a bill anymore. I won't owe that $10,000. I may be responsible for it outside of Penn, but I won't owe it to Penn anymore. So basically, that's not exactly how it works out. So this EFC is going to stay the same because it's based on your family's financial situation and not the costs that are billed to you. So your bill may become smaller, but your EFC is going to be listed as basically the same number unless there are changes in your family's financial situation. Hopefully that makes sense. If there are questions, perhaps we can address them later on. So then your demonstrated financial need is determined by subtracting your EFC from your total budget or your cost of attendance. And this determines how much grant funding you need to meet your educational expenses. And again, like I said in the beginning, this is specifically for undergrads. So the undergraduate aid program at Penn works in a way where after your EFC is determined, whatever other academic costs that you have are met with some combination of grant funds. So when your packaging is completed, your billed expenses and grant funds will be applied to your student account. Billed expenses are applied as positive amounts, and grant funds are applied as negative amounts. Thus, if you owed money to Penn, your balance would show up as positive. And if you should expect a refund for any reason, your balance will show up as negative. And a student account refund is triggered when your grant funding exceeds your billed expenses, meaning you've received more funds than what covers tuition, fees, and any other billed expenses you may have. And those billed expenses could be on-campus housing, on-campus dining. If you charge anything to your account at the bookstore, as another example, that gets applied to your bill. So that could offset some of the funds as well. And I do want to highlight that refunds are not always just from grant funds, but for the sake of this presentation and these examples, we're focusing on that because it simplifies it a little bit more. If you choose to take out loans to cover part of your EFC, and you've taken out more than what you need for just your billed expenses, you'll likely receive part of that in a refund. So let's take a look at an example to demonstrate how they work. And I do want to say this is a hypothetical financial aid package for a student who is living off campus this year and has no meal plan. So the cost of attendance on the left is the actual cost of attendance for students living off campus in this academic year. The financial aid package on the right is just an example of what a student's package could look like. This is probably not representative of what your financial aid looks like. This is just some numbers that we applied to these different grant options. So when you take a look at the bottom amounts, the parts that have been circled, you can see that the student's entire cost of attendance has been covered with some combination of their expected family contribution, their work study award, and other grant funding. So the total budget in both cases is $78,890. All of the costs have been met within the package. So then I want to show you that the numbers in these new blue boxes are the amounts that are applied to the bill. So again, this student is living off campus, doesn't have a meal plan, so those are considered unbilled. They're really just getting tuition and fees charged to their account. And their EFC and work study are not applied to the bill, so they don't help offset that amount. When you calculate how that all works out, if you add the charges as positive amounts and you add the grant funding as negative amounts, you're gonna receive a negative balance of 10,848. And I also want to highlight that while we reached an annual number for this example, you're always going to receive half of this amount in each semester because it's billed 50-50 between the two semesters. Any questions about why student account refunds happen before we talk about options for budgeting them? And I'll linger for 30 seconds or so.
Is it usual for you to have like a refund one semester and then maybe like not a refund the next semester?
I'm going to defer to Eric for that one.
Usually, if your living situation is the same from one semester to the next one, from fall and spring semester, so let's say you live on campus both semesters, your refund should be the same. If things change a little bit when your cost of attendance change, if you're living on campus one semester and then you move off campus the following semester, you are commuting from your parents' house, then that's when the variances on your refund would change, will be. But usually they are the same, unless there are any drastic charges on one semester compared to another one. For example, but also it might affect, let's say you take a class in summer and you don't pay for that class, then your fall semester if you were to get a refund in the fall semester, it might be taken away because of those previous charges that you have. But then your spring semester, you might be able to get your full spring semester because I'm sorry, you might get your full spring refund because your summer class, your previous balance was already paid. But usually, if you live if your living situation is the same, your refund should be the same.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
great question. Thanks for that. If anyone has other questions, you can feel free to send them in the chat. For now, I'm going to hand it over to Matt to talk to you about how to budget your money once you actually have it.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the next part of the presentation is how to actually budget your real refund. Because you have this money and you have to decide what you're going to do with it. So Financial Wellness at Penn has a pretty basic budgeting strategy with 6 steps just for any budgeting situation. So you're going to want to start by tracking your income and your expenses for a month. And then you should actually identify the different budget categories that you're going to have, and then identify what your income will be, and then also the expenses you're going to have for the month. And then you can also decide to set boundaries for your spending. Some month you decide you don't want to spend any money on a particular category or some leisure activity. You can kind of set boundaries and limit yourself there. And then lastly, we want to point out that budgeting isn't just a once and done thing. When you budget, it's really important to keep reflecting on your spending habits and how the actual budgeting experience is going for you. Because if you're spending more money in a category than you expected to, you're going to have to adjust your budget accordingly to make sure that you have the money and that money is coming out of some other category so that all of your expenses and your income kind of equal out.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight real quick, when we're talking about identifying income and expenses, for income, keep in mind, you may have more than just the refund that's coming your way. If you have a work study job, you want to estimate those earnings as well. If you receive any money from family for whatever reason, take that into consideration. And as you're looking at expenses, your academic expenses may not be the only ones you have. So try as much as you can to get a full picture of what all your resources and obligations are, because that's going to leave you the most prepared you can be.
So we also want to note that though those 6 steps will be very helpful for budgeting, refunds from your student account are going to be a little bit different because you are receiving this large sum of money that you're expected to kind of figure out how to manage for a couple months. And because Penn already earmarks certain amounts for different expenses that you're going to have, but it's not actually detailed in the student account, you kind of have to learn how to best manage how you're going to spend that money, because you could always spend these refunds on expenses that maybe aren't for academic costs, but we really don't recommend that because like I said, it is earmarked for those cost of attendance expenses and not just whatever you want it to be. So for the rest of the workshop, we're going to keep using the example from earlier, and we're going to discuss strategies you can use to budget your refund. So as a refresher, all of the amounts in the blue boxes are applied to the student account. So the billed expenses are applied as the positive amounts and the grant funds are applied as negative amounts. And this leads to a negative balance of $10,848 for a whole year. But like we said, that's the whole year. So in the fall, you'll get a refund of $5,424. And then in the spring, the same. So keep this example in mind as we go through the rest of the presentation, because it is going to be the same. Okay, so the first budgeting strategy is called the no budget budget. So this is when you actually just keep your refund in your checking account and spend like you typically would. So let's say the student only has a checking account. So when the refund is direct deposited into their account at the start of the semester, they just don't touch it and they leave their funds there. This method could be the absolute best option for you, and that's fine, and you may have no issues with it whatsoever, but we want to briefly talk about how this particular budgeting method could possibly lead to some problems if you're not diligent with it. Because even the best people with the best intentions make mistakes. Having a large amount of money in your account can sometimes lead to feelings of like comfort and complacency, or feeling like you don't really need to be as vigilant when you're spending, because you have a lot of wiggle room in your checking account. And when you factor in that you need to make this amount last the entire semester, you may need to think more critically about how you're managing this refund so you don't spend it all prematurely. So let's move to option 2. The second budgeting strategy we have is the use as needed budget. So this is when you just keep your refund in a savings account and then withdraw the money from the savings account and move it to a checking account as you need it. And we also like to point out that a lot of savings accounts will have monthly withdrawal limits, so you can maybe only transfer money a certain amount of times. I know my bank account, I'm only allowed like 3 transfers per month or something like that. So maybe this option wouldn't work for you if you have to withdraw a bunch of money very often. But so this student still has a semesterly refund of $5,424. So let's say the student has a checking account and also a high yield savings account. So they actually decide to leave $2,000 in their checking account, but put the rest of the money from the refund in the savings account. So this way, the funds are also going to accrue some interest while it's in that savings account. So this option solves one of the major flaws that we saw in option 1. Most of the money is out of the student's easily accessible checking account. So it's like out of sight, out of mind. The student may be less likely to spend recklessly because doing so will require some forethought to actually transfer that money over into the checking account out of the savings. So now the student can keep a better eye on their checking account balance, and based on upcoming bills and financial responsibilities, the student will decide to transfer money whenever they need it. However, this option, like option 1, still shares some flaws. The fact that the student hasn't made any sort of plan for what to do with the funds and how they'll spend it each month over time, that's still going to be a problem. Without a plan in advance, it can be easy to justify random costs here and there. You could still end up in a position where you have spent so much in the beginning of the semester that you struggle a bit in the later months of the semester. So this isn't very ideal. I know, me personally, this is kind of the budgeting strategy I use, and last semester particularly, it wasn't the best. I know I would keep it all in the savings account in the beginning of the semester and then withdraw as needed, but then I found myself often kind of withdrawing more than I needed, so it led to a little bit of a sticky situation at the end of the semester. So let's discuss another option that may work better. So the third budgeting strategy is the monthly allowance budget. So this is when you keep your refund in a savings account and then withdraw a monthly paycheck, kind of like just you're earning a monthly paycheck from a job, but you're kind of your own employer. So to do this, you basically want to divide your semester refund by the number of months you need to manage it, which is typically 4 months. So you'll divide your semester amount into 4. So you'll have January, in this example, January, February, March, and April allowances. So if this student chose option 3 from our budgeting strategies, they would you would transfer all the money into your savings account as soon as you receive the refund. And then each month you would transfer $1,356 into your checking account to cover some of your monthly expenses. And then on top of this, the student will maybe have their EFC and also a work study award to help cover any remaining expenses that this allowance isn't going to cover. So the 4th budgeting strategy we have is the thorough budget. And with this example, you're gonna outline the expenses that you have for the entire semester in advance. So you plan when you actually make your withdrawals from your savings account based on your planned expenses. And we recommend writing down your entire spending plan somewhere and setting a calendar with reminders so you don't forget, because just like keeping your spending allotments in your head isn't very good. I personally used to do this and it just never worked for me because I wouldn't remember, and then I would end up spending more than I had initially planned. So but with this option, we really recommend putting all the money in the savings account to begin with. So after you estimate your monthly expenses, you're going to discover, for this example, that maybe you only need about $1,100 per month to meet your actual basic needs. So like rent, groceries. So you're always gonna pool that amount at least. But then some months you might need a little extra to cover any additional costs that you might have. So let's say that you have some academic expenses like textbooks maybe that you need to take care of at the start of the semester, and they're around $150. And then you also have your other expenses per usual. So when you receive your refund, you actually leave $1,250 in your checking account and then put the rest into the savings account. But then in February, say you renew an annual subscription that you have that costs $50. So you plan to pull out extra money for that. And then you also plan to celebrate Valentine's Day with your significant other. So maybe you also want to put aside some money for that. So in total, you end up withdrawing $1,300 for February. And then March is going to be pretty typical for you. So you're planning to pull enough money out for rent, groceries, and any personal items you have each month, and then leave the rest in savings. But with this, you can also decide you want to be proactive and plan ahead and think about buying your plane tickets for the home or for your trip home for the summer. So you pull out some additional funds to buy those tickets, which ends up being around $1,700 total. And then April is pretty typical again. So all you need is the basic $1,100 that you withdraw to cover just your basic needs. So that's what you end up withdrawing. So at the end of the semester, because of your planning in this example, you still have a little less than $100 remaining in your savings account. And though that amount sounds pretty small, if that's what you end up with, that means you did a great job budgeting for the semester and did a great job spending your money according to plan, and specifically on the expenses that the funds were actually intended for. And then you even have a little extra left. So we want to highlight that though talking about budgeting is obviously super helpful and sounds really ideal, it's really important to actually implement a budget plan. And we have a few different ways here that you can do that. So we recommend using an app as an option. So Mint is a good budgeting app that allows you to do a monthly budgeting plan. And then Clarity Money is another app that focuses on weekly budgeting. And we also want to highlight that your bank might also have their own mobile app that offers a budgeting tool. And then here at Financial Wellness at Penn, on our website, we also have a budgeting template that is already built so that it has different categories for what you're going to spend in a semester, and it even has a refund option. And then we also want to note that you can always build your own. That's always an option. I know I used to just build an Excel spreadsheet and it worked just fine. But yes, those are some different strategies for implementing an actual budget.
Great. Thanks for that, Matt. So this is the end of the presentation. I do want to highlight, if you are thinking about building your own spreadsheet and you're not really sure how to get started, or you want someone to look over it, you can always email us. We're happy to talk to you about the spreadsheet that you're building and sort of how to address the needs you're trying to address in your budget. Yeah, so if you have questions, please send them in the chat. We would love to spend the rest of our time together answering whatever questions you may have. I also want to share, we have a link to a feedback form on the screen. You can use the short link that's there or scan the QR code with your phone and fill this out as we're answering questions for the rest of the time. And then please continue to connect with us. Our social media handles are at the bottom of the slide. And like I said, you can always email us with any questions you have.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, if anyone has questions, we can hang around for a few more minutes and answer them.
I actually had a quick question about just like budgeting resources.
Yeah.
Like, are there any kind of like specific apps or programs that people use to like budget their spending? Like I heard about the app Mint or something.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, so I'll go back to that slide. So I personally use Mint and would recommend it if you are looking for something really straightforward. Basically, the way that these apps work is you connect your bank account or other accounts that you may use. For example, I connect my like checking account, my savings account, Venmo, I connect to it so that I can track my usage of that if I'm like getting repayments from people. And I want to track that spending. You connect all those accounts and it sort of does the heavy lifting for you and it categorizes your expenses. And really all I do is I set a reminder on my calendar every week to take 15 to 20 minutes just to review my transactions for the week and make sure they were categorized correctly and to see if there's anything else I need to do regarding my spending. So that's always an option. I will say when I was a student, I used a spreadsheet instead because I felt like I needed to be more vigilant about my spending. And I felt like I needed to be super on top of it. So I think your best bet is going to be think about what you're hoping to achieve with your budgeting, and then find the resource that's going to help you meet that goal. And for the sake of this presentation, we have only shared free budgeting apps. If you're ever interested in a paid budgeting app, those are also an option. And we could talk to you about some paid options as well, but we tend to highlight the free ones. And these two that we've highlighted here are ones that students have specifically told us they've used in the past.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, now it is literally just staff remaining. So I'm going to end the recording.